Welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches, and given that it's the start of 2020, I figured I'd get in early and start making some predictions. These predictions don't cover everything, and they don't cover every brand, and they don't cover every aspect of the industry. They're just some of the things which have sort of occurred to me over the next 12 months. If I haven't spoken about a particular brand or issue that you're interested in and would like a prediction, feel free to leave a comment below or DM me with a question, and I'll incorporate that into some later video. But to get into it, I've also, when I was putting this together, I came up with a much longer list than I expected, so I'm going to split it in half. This is my predictions part one, and it's really talking about brands and what I think is going to happen to a couple of brands. We'll start with the biggest and baddest elephant in the room, and that is Rolex. Okay, so Rolex is a really tricky brand to make predictions about because nothing ever actually changes. So how do you make predictions about something that never changes? You've really got to, it now becomes a question of making predictions in the margins and in the edges of what they're doing. And that's what I'm going to try and do. Some of this is utterly unobvious. Through 2020, the basic lineup of a Rolex is not going to change at all. It's barely changed in 50 years. It's not going to change in the next 12 months. There are rumors of a new sub, and that would be likely. I'm not really saying anything outlandish there. There'll be some minor iterations on colors and shapes and fonts and texts and mixing and matching of bracelets and bezels. That's what Rolex does. Again, I'm not saying anything there. I'm going to leap forward almost an entire 12 months and make my first real prediction on Rolex. There will be another price rise on Rolex goods of around 5 to 10% in January 2021. Mark that down now. I'm going to make an even longer term prediction on that. That in 2022 there will be another price rise, and potentially in 2023 another price range. These price rises are going to continue until one of two things occurs. One, we'll use a Submariner as a basis. The Rolex Submariner will end up at around about the same price as a Blancpain 50 Fathoms, and every other watch will rise with it at around about that point. The only thing that will stop that is a fundamental shift in the taste of the market away from steel sports watches, and I do not see that coming. So, as I said, 2021 there's going to be another price rise, and every other Rolex is just going to keep rising in price until they hit the ceiling of that market, which is set pretty much by what we're seeing now on the Rolex secondary market, or where we see 50 Fathoms style watches falling to, which is $12,000 to $15,000 US. Mark my words, that's where a Submariner MSRP will end up in the next 4 or 5 years. Okay, staying inside the Rolex group, we'll move to Tudor. Now, I reckon the P01 that we saw this year was actually a strategic move from Tudor. They took an old watch design, which reused a whole bunch of Black Bay 58 stuff, was quite controversial, so got a lot of coverage, but was also quite controversial, so wasn't going to get made enough. Perfect space filler. Perfect thing to put out there and generate buzz, whilst at the same time building capacity that you didn't have. Because Tudor was capacity limited, they were not able to punch out all the watches that they wanted to in 2019. If they had have come out with that Submariner that everyone's bursting to get hold of, they wouldn't have been able to supply the demand anyway. So coming out with the Submariner in 2018, 2019 would have been dumb. All the reports are they're building a whole bunch of new facilities in conjunction with Kinesi and some other manufacturers. If that comes online, their capacity will go up significantly. I think this will be the year that Tudor release something big that will sell in large numbers, and that's most likely going to be that Submariner, I suspect. I think it'll be released at Baselworld, and it'll probably start coming online towards the end of this year. That gives Tudor plenty of time to get those new facilities in place, up and running, prototyping done, processes in place, QC worked out, and out of the door. On that note, I don't think we'll see any movement with any of the other existing Tudor lines, like the North Flag. I don't think we're going to see any updates there. I think that Tudor will concentrate on continuing to expand places like the Submariner, where you can get a lot of bang for your development buck and not worry about little side projects in 2020. That may come in 21, 22 down the line. With Omega, I think 2020 will be a steady as she goes year. Omega's one of the cash cows of the Swatch group, and big groups don't mess with their cash cows. Omega has been hardening up on their tool credentials through their Ultra series, the Ultra Light and the Ultra Deep. I would not be at all surprised to see some of those technologies come through into some kind of Aquaterra or Planet Ocean this year. So bring some of the titanium movement, or bring some of the super deep technologies into the more standard watch at a more standard price point. Reinforce that view of Omega as being the ultimate tool watch, kind of moving into that space that Rolex is departing. On the point of making a prediction on Omega prices, I'll predict that Omega will under no circumstances chase Rolex up the price chain. I don't see Swatch having any interest in making Omegas more expensive. I think that they're going to welcome Omega moving into Blancpain range, bringing more focus on that end. And I think what you're instead going to see is Swatch Group trying to sell you a lot more 50 fathoms, and they're not going to try and have something like the Planet Ocean or the Seamaster chase the Rolex equivalents. Now, this final prediction with Omega isn't really a prediction. It's more I wouldn't be surprised if. I wouldn't be surprised if Omega did continue with its ultra tool kind of idea. And we've had the Ultra Light, we've had the Ultra Deep. A next option could be something like an Ultra Fast. So an out there prediction, something that we could see from Omega, if not this year then shortly, might be something like a Speedmaster offering a 100th of a second capability. Don't know, but it would certainly fit within that arc that Omega are setting themselves up for. Okay, so now moving to a brand close to my heart, Breitling. I think we're going to see changes there, but nothing unexpected. They're going to be following the arc through 2020 that they've been laying down through 2018 and 2019. So specifically, that's going to mean a continuing falling away of SKUs as the range gets more and more focused. We're probably going to see more limited and special editions, and I think this is actually an unspoken part of Omega's addiction to limited editions. What they allow you to do is maintain a very limited core of your catalog. If you look at the Omega catalog, the core part is actually pretty limited. They don't give you a lot of choices, but having all these limited editions allows you to stay in the news cycle without having to maintain very, very large inventories. I strongly suspect Breitling's going to follow that model as well. We're starting to see that a little bit on the Navitimer, and it's coming through now on the Premier line as well. Watch for that trend to continue. Now, this next prediction with Breitling is actually based on a tip I got from a viewer. A viewer, in response to my ETA and Comco article, told me that Breitling was actually in discussions with Sellita and in preparation to move across to them away from ETA. That makes total sense. In fact, it's more than makes sense. It's probably necessary. So unsurprising that would occur. That can't happen overnight. Breitling extensively modify the packages that they get from ETA. The interiors, not the exterior form, fit and function, but the interiors of the ETA and the Sellita movements are different. So if you're modifying the interior of an ETA movement, those mod packs, those instructions, that training, that tooling you have for the ETA movement may not work when you're wanting to make the similar modifications to a Sellita. So I suspect Breitling's in the process of making those changes, getting an arrangement in place with Sellita to be able to provide the movements as required. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen towards the back end of 2020. Might happen further into 2021 though. Now, I don't know the nature of the relationship between Tudor and Breitling. We all know that there is one. They're already sharing a couple of movements. I think Breitling would love to get hold of the Tudor MT5402 movement. Now, that's just 26 millimeters across, as opposed to the current Tudor movement that they're using, which is a whopping 32 millimeters across. That 32 millimeter movement simply won't fit in a lot of the smaller Breitling cases. which is probably why they've stuck with ETAs for a number of things like their Super Ocean and some of their Premier and Navitimer three-handers. I think that Breitling would love to get hold of that smaller Tudor MT5402. I think if they can do that, and if Tudor can provide the numbers, and maybe they can with these new facilities coming online, they will put that into their Aviator, their Navitimer and their Premier three-handers, and I think we will see 36mm versions of all of those watches come out if they can get that smaller movement. And finally on Breitling, the Navitimer, the Aviator, the Super Ocean and Avenger lines have all been given a refresh over the last couple of years. The Super Ocean Heritage line is by definition a heritage line, so it doesn't really need a refresh. So that really only leaves the Galactic and the Chronomat to go. One of those will get messed with this year. I don't know which one. I think it depends a bit, again, on what happens with that MT5402 movement. If Breitling can get that movement from Tudor, if Tudor can provide that movement in the numbers required, I think we'll see an overhaul of the Galactic line. I think we'll see the remaining watches in that line blown away, and a complete re-suite of that more blinged, dressy tool watch that the Galactic line provides. I think that smaller movement is required because Breitling's going to want to keep the same movement across all sizes of that line. They seem to have resisted, for example, downgrading the woman's or unisex version, the smaller version of a watch, to have an ETA movement, but having manufacture movements in the higher ones, in the bigger ones, I should say. I think that if they can get hold of a 26mm manufacture movement from Tudor, then they will update their Galactic line across the board, very gender neutral, but with sizes potentially as small as 34mm and potentially going up to like 42s. Okay, so now moving to JLC, and perhaps this is more of a hope than a prediction. I think we'll see something definitive this year in 2020 after a couple of years of, if not drift, then half-hearted prods. If you go look at JLC, they have 8 collections, but they really have 3 big money spinners. And those are the Reverso, the Master, and the Polaris collections. The Reverso and Master collections are very mature, well-rounded, very complete, don't need or possibly even wouldn't withstand a significant level of reform. That only leaves the Polaris, the biggest potential money spinner for JLC, which is kind of languishing roughly where it was when it was first introduced 2 years ago, with a fair bit of fanfare, I must admit. I don't understand why it's been allowed to drift as it has for the last year or two. Maybe what JLC's been waiting for is when they would kill off their master compressor diving and their extreme ranges, which they've now well and truly done. Those watches are dead, they are off the category. So the master collection no longer offers any of those serious hardcore, albeit very JLC-like, dive watches. Potentially that opens up the option for the Polaris to go that way, for the Polaris to now expand into that space and offer something a little bit less dress, a little bit more hardcore dive, which JLC has done, albeit in their own very unique way. And the reason why I think this could happen is for exactly the same reason that Rolex, I predicted earlier, Rolex is going to keep increasing the prices on their watches until they hit that $12,000 to $15,000 Blanc Pomp 50 fathoms range. The secondary market for Rolex has clearly indicated people are prepared to pay that much if you have the right watch. I think JLC could have the right watch. Could they sell as many as Rolex? Of course not. Could they compete with Rolex for leadership of that category? Of course not. Could they sell a shit tin of watches to people who can't be bothered waiting for a Rolex? Absolutely they could. And I think that Richemont could make a ton of money selling $12,000 Polaris-based extreme divers to people. So I think that's where the Polaris will go, and I think that's what we'll start to see from that line. It'll effectively shadow the Rolex as it moves up into that space. And we'll finish this off with a discussion of Seiko. And kind of like a lot of these other brands, Seiko's year for 2020 will be a continuation of what we've seen over 2018 and 2019. One, models are going to continue to creep up in price across the board. Two, older models, popular models of the past, will be reintroduced but modified slightly to fit with the new brands within the Seiko group. So older core Seiko watches will be re-released but under the new brands of Prospex or Presage specifically. We'll also see the Presage and the Prospex lines continue to grow and the overlap with Grand Seiko continue to develop. There will be no weakening of that overlap, and as I've discussed previously, that overlap is not an error, it's not a mistake, it's not an unintended consequence. It is a deliberate strategy from the Seiko group. For 2020 and beyond, I predict that the Seiko group will handle the overlap between Presage, Prospex and Grand Seiko by further distinguishing them in some core way other than price. My suspicion will be that Grand Seiko will focus on the ultimate of finish. My prediction is that Prospex will focus on the ultimate function. So you may have a Prospex diver and a Grand Seiko diver that are borderline broadly the same price, but the Grand Seiko will be better finished, produce higher quality dials, etc., whilst the Prospex will go deeper, will be faster, will last longer. That will be the trade-off. Prospex is going to follow, as it says on the tin, pro specifications. Grand Seiko will do what it says on the tin and be grander. Okay, I'm going to stick with the theme of doing some real out there type things. I think we're going to see some bigger moves within the Seiko group to reach out into other brands and other parts of the company it's not leveraging particularly well at the moment. So the first thing I think is that we are going to see more and more integration by the Seiko group of Orient into its plans. I think that the real replacement of the Seiko XKX was in fact the Orient Komatsu, and I suspect that Orient is going to become more and more available, is going to be pushed more and more into our consciousness, and that Orient watches are going to be positioned as the budget entry-level value for money watches that the Turtle and the Samurai and the SKX were. Oh, hint, I don't think that the Turtle and the Samurai have long-term futures. I strongly suspect that watches anything less than $500 to $600 and potentially in the even longer term $1,000 will end up being Orients and will not be Prospex or Presage watches. And finally, possibly my most out there prediction, but the one I also can't understand Seiko isn't doing. At some point, Seiko is going to notice the G-Shock love that's out there in the community. Got to be honest, I don't get it, but you clearly feel it, so it's there. They're going to notice that, and they're going to remember that they own the brand that introduced the very first digital watches, that they own the brand that started all of this. And at some point, they're going to try and bring Pulsar back out of the cold, and they're going to try and push that in exactly the same way as Casio has done so successfully, and we're seeing Bulova starting to do with their sort of initial digital reintroductions. So look forward potentially to Pulsar trying to get some of that retro hipster my first watch love over the next year or so. So I've been Pete McConville. This is Not So Obvious Watches, and those are my predictions for some of the major brands over the next year. Some of those predictions go way out past a year. Those predictions, in some cases, I've gone completely off the reservation, and they're more possibilities. In some cases, they're things potentially I'd like to see more than I think will actually happen. I'll let you be the judge of which is which. If you think I've missed anything, if you think there's anything else really big, if you think there's another company and you're interested in where I think they're going to go, stick them in the comments below. If you wait a little while, a card's going to come up. It's got my Instagram details. Give us a follow over there. Send me a DM if you want. You're going to see my email address. Feel free to send me an email if you want to get in contact. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button. But if you hit the dislike button, can you do us a favor and tell us what you didn't like? I make no promises whatsoever to change, but it does help me understand where I feel like I might not be hitting the mark sometimes. Finally, please subscribe to the channel. It does me a power of good, makes me feel better if nothing else. I've been Pete McConville. This is Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.